Thank you again for joining us. As I was saying, it's such a pleasure, and honestly, it's we always seem to have the greatest conversations. You are such an inspiring person, so it only fits that we're doing a little session with you today.
Appreciate you.
I am Ariel Coplan, one of the co-founders of Not 9 to 5, and I just want to share a little content warning that the aim of the conversation is going to be to have real and honest dialogue. Some different forms of mental health may be brought up in mental health and addiction and substance use. If at any point you're feeling uncomfortable about the conversation, feel free to pop out of the chat. We are recording it and we'll release it later on the YouTube channel, so you'll be able to view it as you like. If at any point you're feeling the need to talk to a trained crisis counselor, you can text 686868 in Canada or 741-741 in the United States.
And so I have just copy and pasted those into the chat box for anyone if you're interested. I'm Hassel Aviles. I'm the other co-founder of Not 9 to 5. Ariel and I have known each other for many years through the industry. I grew up in the industry, working in every hospitality outlet that you can think of, every front of house role that you can think of, all the way up until owning one. And through all the years, I really felt that there was not enough conversation around what I was experiencing and feeling and what I was seeing happening to so many of my loved ones around me. So we started Not 9 to 5. And I, about 2 years ago, was lucky enough to meet Mark Brand through a mutual friend of ours, Charlotte Langley, who I love so much. And I see you clapping, Mark, because that's how I feel about when I say Charlotte. And there's no way I can introduce you the way that you'll do. So I'm going to ask you, if Mark, you could introduce yourself and the work you do with Better Life Foundation.
Sure, happy to, and honored to be here. I think the disclaimer at the beginning was a really quick reminder for me, because I live in this field, that it isn't comfortable for everybody at all times. And there's a level of comfort that you get to with practice and rigor around your own mental health and that of others. So yeah, Ariel, I just really appreciate you presencing that to start, because it puts us in a really good place. And also made my ears perk up. I was like, right, of course. My name is Mark, like they said. I run a bunch of different organizations, and I think it's important when you introduce yourself. A dear friend of mine, Holly Murchison, is the expert of this. She wrote a book called Tell Me About Yourself that's beautiful, and she's brilliant, about never overstating because you lose people, and also never underplaying because you sell yourself short. So what's the center of it is what makes you feel power, right? So I like to say I work at the intersection of upward mobility for marginalized populations, food systems, mental health, and empowerment. And so that's a lot of jargon, but it's true for me. So when people are like, they're either interested and they'll ask me more, or they're not interested and they'll move along. But in either instance, I haven't wasted anybody's time, which is wonderful. And I felt good about it, right? Because if you go into the narrative, it's like, well, I'm a restaurateur, I'm a cook, I'm an integral facilitation coach, I'm a professor of innovation. All of that shit sounds egoic, and it feels like off-putting to others. And it also puts you in a comparative situation, which isn't good for anybody's noggin. So professionally, I own and operate businesses that provide critical food need for people who are living in the margins. And when we say the margins, I think it's just a sweeping generalization, but I like to keep it that way because it allows us to help everybody, specifically with charitable rules. So I run a charity on the side of the border. Canadian side, I'm currently in Vancouver, BC, and on the US side, both are called the Better Life Foundation because it's the same thing. And as of this year, also in Mexico City and Monterrey, Mexico. So that organization here in Vancouver, we feed just under 1,800 people a day. That's 23 different single room occupancy hotels and about another dozen organizations, from women's shelters to safe injection sites. Those meals are prepared in a commissary kitchen, which is attached to a venue that some of you guys have been to, called Save Our Meats, historic place of food security here in Vancouver. And we employ people who have physical and mental diverse abilities. We don't say disability because that's a bullshit word. They're diversely able. So they're really, really good at certain tasks and other ones they don't like, kind of like all of us. So we have a really cool archetype for our employment models there. We care deeply about getting people out of recidivism, so it's repeated jail visits, out of street entrenchment, and out of those classic barriers that employment shows them. So I care a lot about that. And I use cooking as a tool to open dialogue and to make people feel comfortable and heard on both sides of the have or have not duality that capitalism has created. So we do convenings, and I do a lot of teaching. In this moment, tomorrow we're running a class. We're running a class remotely with partners, and partnership is very key to what I do. And the 3 partners we're working with right now are Help USA, which works with homelessness in New York City predominantly, Street Soccer USA, which works across the US to help people in the margins access sport, and Swipe Out Hunger. And Swipe Out Hunger is a massive national organization that works with food insecure students. So we've been convening just like this, bombing them with CSA boxes and delicious food, doing a 2-hour tutorial with myself and Chef Eris Johnson, Chop Champion, awesome Brooklynite, answering all the questions that make people uncomfortable around food, then one-on-one teachings. And then we convene again, which is tomorrow, which is our graduation, where we send them more food, and then they cook for us and show us what they've made and why.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so
That
innovation
amazing.
is at the center of the work, right? Consistently looking at innovation in a way that, what has this moment given us versus what is it taking away from us? Personally, I can feel the takeaway part, but professionally, I want to see what it's given us. So I hope that does the job.
Yeah, that is.
No,
See, I couldn't. I wouldn't have been able to say all of that. So that's why I like to ask people to introduce themselves.
Perfect.
You know, because I feel like it encaptures everything. There's nothing that you're gonna forget, right? I'll forget half of what you just shared. So thank you for sharing that. I so appreciate it. It helps to give context, you know, to all the important work you do, but also I feel like, you know, all of our webinars have been panels, and this is the first time we're doing a one-on-one. So I really just wanted to set some context for why we felt that was important and why we felt, you know, you were the perfect person to do that with. Because so Ariel and I, a couple months ago, we got our mental health first aid certification. We did that program, and it was so incredible when it really just helped me learn a little bit more about. There was a lot I knew and there was a lot I learned, and some of the stuff that was new for me was just the real true importance of learning how to hold space. And, you know, it not being about providing answers, it not being about, you know, sharing resources with people if they don't want them. You know, if you want them, here they are, but really just learning how to actively listen to people and hold space. And you're definitely someone that has always done that, at least in the few conversations that we've had and from when I first met you. So I thought this is so great, you know, to be able to have and go deep into some of these conversations. Right now, there's a lot of people that are still repressing and suppressing a lot. I hear all the time people that slide into the DM, people that text me, people that are really struggling. And I just wanted to have a conversation with someone that I knew could go there. So thank you for being here today, and thanks for everyone tuning in.
Can you, Mark, can you get into a little bit more about your journey with mental health and addiction?
Sure. And so I think it's important to set like a stage around the language for people who are new to the conversation. So we talk a lot about mental health, and it has a directly negative connotation. If we bring it up, there's a problem. And that's just simply not the case. Everybody has mental health. Everybody has physical health, right? So I work in mental wellness and try and make sure that people are accessing the tools that allow them to feel strong in their own mind, which is intrinsically connected to their body, and their spirit and energy and all of those things. I didn't have any of those words. I didn't grow up in a space where that was accessible to me. And I think that we're in this interesting time right now where information is everywhere, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's positive. It can be very overwhelming. So in my personal journey, my family has a history of mental illness and having issues with everything from bipolar disorder to dissociative disorders to some paranoid schizophrenia, and it's patterned throughout some of my family trees. Now, even now, after doing all the work, it makes me a little uncomfortable because there's a shame cycle around that, and there shouldn't be. Right? So to get really clear on it, 1 in 4 people will suffer real mental illness in their life. And every single person on the planet will be directly impacted by 1 degree of it. That's just real. So there should be no shame around it. Doesn't make any of those members of my families on either side any less. It just is, right? So we don't shame people for physical illnesses or ailments, and we certainly shouldn't do that for mental ailments either. So I knew very young that I had anxiety that was pretty serious and that was triggered by a lot of things. My life wasn't very stable, and it went through big ebbs and flows like a lot of us. And in that, I never really felt safe. Like I didn't ever feel the core belief of safety. And I also never felt love. I never felt like the core belief that I was loved or safe. And those 2 things make up pillars of our identities, but also of our ability to cope. And so I didn't have those tools. And so what I went to instead was trying to be affable, trying to be charismatic, trying to be charming, trying to have all the wit and the skills around that to make other people engage with me so I didn't feel alone or lonely. And that was my childhood, essentially, in a mental health nutshell, right? I was consistent moving, consistently being uprooted, and then not feeling like I belonged anywhere. And little did I know that most of the people in my circles were feeling almost exactly the same, because we didn't talk about it, right? So I think my first foray into imposter syndrome would have been like at 9 years old, where I moved and none of the kids spoke like me, and none of them looked like me, and none of them dressed like me, and none of them did the things like me. And instead of understanding my uniqueness was beautiful, I wanted immediately to conform and to almost disappear. So it started there. And then I started abusing substances by the time I was 12, 13, which was a societal norm in the Maritimes where I lived. It just was like kids were doing all sorts of stuff. The movie Kids was actually directly relative to my upbringing, but not New York, Nova Scotia. So we were wild, and it was an expression of our pain and an expression of our lack of understanding of the ultra violence around us. And all of the things that were going on consistently. And our influences were gangster movies. And our external influences were also each other being in this way. One memory that just pops up for me right now is Nova Scotia famously made it onto CNN for a race riot that wasn't a race riot. We were just all in gangs and we all fought all the time. But it got termed that. So all of these things create deep trauma, trust issues, bias, around this is just the way things are, which created in me, along with my culinary piece. I started cooking at 14, working at a pizza shop, and there's beautiful memories around that, and I've never stopped. And along those 2 narratives together, it created this sort of like false martyr archetype. Right? Like everything is hard. It's always going to be hard. Life is completely unfair. You are absolutely alone. Make no mistake that everybody's out to get you. All of those things rang really true to my person. And so I created them. I kept creating those situations for myself. And that's what we do, right? And I don't want to go too far into the woo-woo realm just right yet, but like we manifest those things for ourselves. If that's what we want, I started selling drugs at 14, 15. Like that's who we decide that we're going to be. That's who we'll be. And the opposite of the course is true. So I fell really hard to addiction, sort of 15-ish, in that sort of shitty lifestyle. And my mom was having a lot of struggles. She was single parenting at the time, and her and I just blew up, and I was unable to be safe at home because of our, like, mentally safe, physically, of course, my mom is the best, but she just didn't know what to do, and she has issues of her own. So I ended up out on the street a bunch, and on couches a bunch, and unsure what to do, which just furthered the narrative of me being unsafe and unloved, which were also both untrue after a lot of work. So that cycle perpetuated. It did its thing, and at 30, it hit me again really, really badly, to a point that I attempted to take my own life, and luckily was unsuccessful. Still unsure how. The science doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm still around, luckily, happily, very happily. But we have those moments, and in sharing these stories and narratives out loud, it creates really big chasms of both like relief at the top over here and then exposure over here. And because I was a public personality out on this coast, we'd done a reality show and other things were happening shortly after that, that it became it's a real challenge. So I surfaced that because I wanted to not be thought of in the past. It's constant. My addiction is still very real. It's very, very real to alcohol and to drugs. It's there. I'm just currently not partaking, right? It didn't go away. Those stories, even though I'm in control of them most of the time, they're all still there. They still exist in my body. They still exist in my mind. And if I'm triggered in a way that somebody says something, I've built the tools to deal with them and to cope and help others, but they're still there. They're still very much there. So respecting them and being aware is the strength.
Thank you for sharing. That's super powerful. I think for me, one of the things that I find to be that I pick up on is the way that you're bringing food up through it as well, and how it's like a consistent, like it's like, you know, the connection around food and like your good memories around the pizza place. Like I think for me, that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, man. I mean, the power that comes with having the skill sets around food. The first time the Lebanese dudes taught me how to make dough, I was like, this is it. I felt like somebody had been lying to me my whole life instantly. I was like, wait a second. We sell this to people at $2.50 a slice. I feel like we're robbing them. Like, what do you mean? And then also, like, the other comparison that my young teenage brain played was, oh, other people are really excited about, like, getting their license to impress girls. I'm going to go to their house and make pizza. Like, trump that. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, and then just the beauty of the process and how it was a never-ending quest to get it right. Because even when you got it right, there was room for improvement. And those things all just bring me joy.
Well, and I think like I can relate big time with that, and getting to a point and just being a natural competitor and wanting to be like, have the greatest pizza, and like just working at figuring out what elements of the dough will make it that much better, and like nerding out on it in a way that's like very few people probably understand, right?
Until you share it with them, right? So there's the yes. Totally. And when I eat with people, when I cook, and I've cooked with you guys and around you guys, like, I get really, really activated because I want you to experience what I experience, and you want me, chef, to experience what you experience. And that's why we are, as a community, at our very best and brightest with each other in celebration of nourishing our minds, nourishing our bodies, and nourishing each other. Like, we love that shit. And get us activated about it. Like, I'm full goosebumping right now on all the way up my shoulders. That's the feeling that you want out of whatever it is that you decide to do in life, not the opposite. Right? So how do you find what you're passionate about? Get goosebumps talking about making pizza dough. That's a key identifier, right?
Yeah, totally. At what point did you start the honest and raw dialogue of telling your story? I mean, obviously it's a powerful one, and you know it's still going. But at what point was there a bit of a transition?
Oh man, this one's easy for me to answer. It was 2013. We'd been shooting our reality show, and I had realized that I'd become a character of myself. So the business person that had 11 different businesses, 13 different cost centers, one investor ever, like just for one business, we all scratch made. All of the things people had told me I was by giving me awards or writing about me, or like why we were on this show, my ego began to believe to such a deep level that I was just playing a character of myself. I also had to play a character of myself because we had 5 TV crews follow us for 6 months. So I had to literally be in character of me, being mindful of every syllable, every breath, everything that was being seen. And I wouldn't begrudge that experience. It literally changed my life in the most positive of ways after the most negative of ways. But at that moment, I had one of my best friends sat down with me, and he's like, I don't know what you like anymore. And I felt that, like, it felt like he literally stabbed me in the sternum. And because it was so true, right? And of course you go into defense or your fight or flight. And I was like, I don't know what that means. He's like, do you still like rap music? Do you still like to play basketball? Do you still like to throw dice? Do you still like to play cards? Like, do you still like to hang out? Because you don't do any of those things with me or anybody else. I was like, wow, I do love all those things. But that's not how I responded. I didn't respond thoughtfully. I responded in rage and broke that friendship, unfortunately, to an irreparable state over many of those different things. But in that moment, I had been asked to do a TEDx talk coming up. And I'll make this long story short as I can, because I think there's some critical moments that I hope other people can see themselves in as far as like your own narrative and your own story. So what's the story I'm going to tell at TEDx? The story of like the scratch-made entrepreneur of the year, dude. Is that the story? Is that interesting? No, it's not interesting at all. Is it an opportunity to just bear it? I think that's probably a better way to go about it. Why are you doing what you do? Why do you actually care? And so I went with this self-exploration, and I took stage in 2013 at TEDx Vancouver, right after the woman who invented Botox. And the woman who invented Botox, when she took the stage, had a real challenge with her talk. And because she had been her first patient, her face didn't really move much. Wonderful lady. And she started to cry, but you couldn't see any emotion on her face. And I can just remember being deeply impacted by that and being like, oh my God, that's so fucking real. Like everything about that is so real. And my coach was her coach as well for the TEDx thing. He's just a wonderful guy. Walked up to me, put his hands on my shoulders, and was like, you know what you have to do now. And I was like, is this one of those talks? And so I went on a stage and I just told my truth. And it's for the first time in its entirety. And I can only describe it as like the first time I was ever in flow state. Because I went out and I kind of blacked out. And I did the talk, and then I can remember finishing it and sort of bowing, and then people standing. You're like, oh, I think I did really well. And realizing at that moment that my most powerful tool was my true voice. It wasn't any of the other shit. It wasn't success in business. It wasn't the people that you surround. It was none of that. It was just like your truth, right? And so if your story is that you're the martyr or that you're broken, you fear the loss of identity of that. I think a lot of us fear the loss of identity because we identify with something in our archetypal group in our industry. At that moment, I was like, I don't want to be in that anymore. I don't want to be that person because that person doesn't serve me. And they're also, that's not real. And parts of it, of course, are real. And I'm being dramatic for the reason, but like you come out of the other side of that, and like, if I'm just honest to all of this, maybe I could actually heal it. Maybe I could feel safe. Maybe I could feel love, like really feel it. Maybe those things are possible for me. And so that started the journey. And getting a positive reaction in telling your truth when you think that it's going to be the opposite is really helpful. And sorry, last thing I'll say on that is the amount of people that reached out after that talk to compare and contrast who they thought I was to what I had said and how it helped them was the definition of like, I want to do that going forward. Not from their appreciation, but to the understanding that to truly be in service, which we've been in our whole lives, is to help other people heal and see themselves. And if you can do that for yourself intrinsically at the same time, that's got to be the greatest gift that we could have.
I think there's so much power in that, right? Like being so vulnerable and like you're saying, getting to a point where, you know, you're just flowing and you're being, you know, so real, like maybe even saying things that you haven't really said to yourself before.
Totally.
And having
well,
people
and also,
respond.
Can I add one thing too? Like, Ariel, I feel like you and I talk about this all the time. And Mark, I'm curious if you agree. I feel that vulnerability is contagious. It is something that starts to spread like a virus. You know, you do it, I do it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is like catching on. Do you find that, Mark?
Definitely. And there's a razor's edge here, right? So if you don't know me and you read my words and I write something, we're on the internet together, you're going to make a decision. We all make judgments between 0.6 and 3 seconds, right? Our brain works that way. And we make our judgments based off everything that has created us. And if that judgment happens, it's either going to be, oh, this is oversharing and this is too much and I got to turn this dude off or this girl off, like it's too much for me. I always ask people to look at that. It may just be personal preference. A large majority of the time, it might just be like, I don't like the way you write. I don't like the things you do. Totally cool. That's over here. That's for you. But in that sharing, if I feel something, like if I read somebody else's words and I'm like, oh my God, that makes me super uncomfortable, I ask myself why. And then I ask myself why again. And then I ask myself fucking why a third time. And then I get to something underneath where I'm like, oh, that's because in grade 11, you were in a fist fight. Somebody said this to you. It's stuck. It's back here. You can just take that out and have a look at it and let it go. And maybe that served you, right? So because our judgments are so fast, they come out and we just like, if it continues to hit our parasympathetic in a way that we like feel uncomfortable, we might not engage it especially if we're already struggling with our mental health. Because like, I can't do one more thing right now. Right. So in that communication, I went in that rabbit warren a little bit because I want us to understand why it's important, but also why it's challenging. So if you put yourself out there, there's an immediate division in the people that you spend time with. Right. And one of the most common tropes is, oh, that's not the person that I know. Right. Because if we're not comfortable with ourselves, we're not comfortable with others' growth. We're not comfortable with the fact that we are constantly adapting and changing. We're like, this is the one thing. Harkening back to that conversation with that friend, why I also got upset was like, maybe I'm developing, maybe I'm growing, maybe I'm changing. And so if you're sharing these things, there's a tremendous risk to your ego and your psyche as well, that you may come under attack. You may upset some people. You may further isolate yourself. You may ostracize yourself. So I think vulnerability is really important if your circles are safe. And you may define that your circle is not safe, right? You may find out that that's not the case. And the good thing about us as humans is there's lots of us around, and it's always cool to make new friends.
Such a great point. I mean, I think having that safety is a blessing. Like, it really is, because, I think, as we start to develop and grow older, and, even go from, different restaurant to restaurant, like, or different, workplace to workplace, I think you really start to see, as you're kind of become aware of that, you start to see like, hey, this place was not good for me. And, like, looking in retrospect too, sometimes, where you're like, fuck, last year I wasn't in a good headspace. And so, like, it doesn't happen right away all the time, I find.
Reflection is important. And this is bringing up a very key point. Don't attach or get lost to people, place, companies, organizations. We tend to go in. I can remember working at a restaurant here in Vancouver when I first got here called Chambar. Chambar nationally celebrated restaurant. I was their second bar manager. I was working front of house as a cocktail barman. I loved my job. I mean, loved it. Like, I had crashed. I'd been like a really successful DJ in Australia. I got ill. I had to leave and come to Canada, bottomed out. Chambar gave me hope that I could then be like in service to people again in the way that I wanted. I got so lost in the mission of that restaurant and what it did and all of the people there. I was completely gone from myself. I was, again, playing that archetype. And it broke my heart when I eventually ended up leaving momentarily. I was just like shook really badly because I wasn't attached to my mission, to my purpose, to my prosperity. I was attached to somebody else's, and it was intrinsically linked. So if those two things are linked, you can do so much damage to yourself, because you're obviously, that's somebody else's dream and somebody else's mission that you're in service to. And that's wonderful, as long as you can keep a healthy boundary there. Right? So if you're cooking online and you're learning, you'll put up with shit. And you're like, this is okay, because I'm learning. What is the balance of what I'm taking here? And what I like to share with people is, I learned so much at all the different places that I've worked over my many years about how to do things well, but I've learned more about how not to do them. What created myself, like the leadership archetype that I wanted to build, was, here's the list of shit I'm never going to do at people. Now, I ended up doing half of them at least. It's just a way. And unfortunately, you fall into those same tropes. Like, it just is. And even if you're aware of it and what you don't want to do, ultimately the pressure of this business can create things you don't want to. But being aware of them and consistently trying to strive for better. So I think that you're absolutely correct. Reflecting back again, sometimes we're the frog in the pot. Right? Like, it's boiling and we don't even know, because we've become so entrenched in our own story and our own narrative and our own pain. That's our normal. Our normal is to not feel good enough. Our normal is to just like, let's get through the shift so I can just hit the bar and drink till 3 o'clock and be obliterated and feel something, because we get caught.
So how has your relationship changed with the industry throughout the years? Because, starting as a young pizza maker, going all the way, DJ, like how has your actual perspective and relationship changed throughout the years?
It's a really interesting question right in this moment, right? Because our industry is forever changed. And we hear that thrown around, right? This moment, and it's positive, it's negative. It's neither. It just is kind of where I sit, is like, this is where we are. How do we carry each other forward? My relationship with the industry goes through these real ebbs and flows of my love and then anger. I get really mad at the industry a lot because of what it takes from people, and we allow it to take, and we continue to perpetuate the behavior that is so damaging to humans, to the understanding of our food systems. And we participate in a supply chain that has created global devastation. And so those things are very challenging for me. The flip side is I can walk into one of our spaces and watch somebody celebrating a wedding, or having a first date nervously in a very comfortable space, or watching groups of women feel very safe at our cocktail bar because of the way it's designed and has been designed for 11 years to not allow fucking creeps in it. Like, those things give me life, because building community spaces is incredibly important for people to convene and not feel sad and not feel isolated. Then the third, I guess, node over here is, as a sober person, I own a brewery and I make booze, and I also own a cocktail bar and we serve it. So I have this duality of like wanting people to enjoy responsibly, and knowing that that is absolutely and utterly not my control or business, and I can only share what I know and make sure that we serve responsibly. But I think the list is infinite, brother. Like, I honestly think it goes on and on and on. What I do know is that it's the greatest business in the world, that it services and looks after the best people who struggle, who are going for their degrees, who are trying to be the next lead actor on the CMW's Flash. Like, all of this stuff we support. We are the backbone of that, and we hold space for it. And in the interim, we also create deep and lasting friendships and community between the people who work there. Like, unlike anything else that you'll ever see, aside from maybe frontline work, right? Or being in a war. Like, the restaurant industry builds bonds of brother and sisterhood that are just unbreakable. And so we have this moment to reimagine what it looks like to go forward. So my relationship with the industry right now is threefold. It's safety, primarily. Like, can we be safe in serving people? I don't believe so. I know that that's going to be, it has already been a highly unpopular opinion, because everybody wants to get back to work, but I don't think it serves us. I think it will just decimate more venues. In the simple math on that, for my mental health, just so I've said it, restaurants, for those of you folks who don't own or operate in them, we work on 80% occupancy. That's the end of the conversation. If it's 50, we can't work. I don't care what subsidies may come, and people are like, well, that'll offset, et cetera. Just, can you imagine the experience? Why do you go to a venue? You love the energy. You love being around people. You love that. You love the camaraderie. So my relationship with it right now is one of trepidation and safety first, and then understanding that the model that we've built at Save On, in particular with the Better Life Foundation, that is the model. Cooks are going to work. We've been able to hire 6 people. They're going to work. They're in purpose. They love what they do. They're sharing what they do with people who really need it. And that food need didn't start because of COVID. It's always been there. We've always been in service to it. So to have other people come to it and be aware and open, it's a huge win. It's a huge, huge win. So I think the 10 years spent in social purpose and impact and trying to raise my voice nonstop, yelling at people like, this is what we have to look at, is being yelled at me right now. And that's okay. It feels really good to see other restaurateurs stepping up and be like, we're serving frontline workers, and it's the greatest thing that's ever happened. I'm like, cool. Can I help you? You need some support? Are you good? And they're like, I can't believe how good this feels, brother. I'm like, is that right? Is that
must
right?
be such a bizarre feeling, Mark. I can only imagine.
It's the best. It doesn't matter how people get the message. It just matters that they get it. It doesn't matter how it comes.
That's a good point. That's true too. I've definitely had that experience before where I was like, that's not how I pictured this going, but here we are. So let's just accept it for what it is. You brought up your team. So I'm curious, during this time, there's so much going on. How do you show up for your team during this time?
I feel immediately called to say exactly as they need me, but that wouldn't be entirely true.
Right.
I'm balancing, I think, my own mental health and isolation. So for scope, I am immunocompromised on multiple layers. I have multiple conditions health-wise that don't allow me to be with people right now. And as a person who's always with people, I'm on week 11. So I feel like I want to echo your question and be like, how are we showing up for each other? And I feel incredibly proud of my team, in particular my managing directors, for just like being omnipresent with me, and us being able to navigate this thing together just further shows me why everybody on my team is so incredibly important to the overall. I feel like Phil Jackson in this moment. Like, honestly, like the talent is there. The talent is so deep and it has such diverse personalities. And for those of you that don't catch the analogy, Phil Jackson is a basketball coach, one of the best of all time. Currently is getting a lot of airplay with Michael Jordan on Netflix. But there's the idea and the analogy, if you're a really good leader, that you're allowing everybody to show up in their power and you also understand what they need as support. So if you can balance those two things in a meaningful way, and also I've had a bunch of flare-ups during this where my anxiety's just gotten too big and it showed up as anger, and I've let that anger out and then had to do the work on the back end. And my partner, whose birthday it is today, Ash McLeod, who you guys both know, we had a bit of, not of a blowout, but like a really heated discussion about how we were dealing with something. And at the end of it, I felt called to apologize. And he laughed. He was like, we've been in business together for 7 years. If you think that hurts my feelings or offends me in any way and doesn't make me appreciate you, you're wrong. So that sentence is how I'm trying to show up for everybody else, to be able to reflect that it's safe to be yourself. And I think there was a question around boundaries that this is a perfect example of. You are not.
I was going to go there next, but you go.
Right.
Go ahead.
I can just roll straight into it if that works for you. Suggesting and creating boundaries needs to be in a place, in a professional workplace, that respects everybody, right? So it's the one set of rules that governs and keeps everybody safe, right? There is we do not allow in any way misogynistic comments or actions. That's a hard stop, like immediate dismissal, that's over. We do not allow bullying or any sort of actions that would be to the detriment of anybody's mental health. Full stop, immediate dismissal. We'll deal with extra pay if we have to. But those are things that are non-negotiables. The other parts are that we really encourage our staff to share what their needs are. Like, what do you need? And if they don't know what their needs are, then having the conversation with them to help them get there. That's what management is for. It truly is the definition of it. If you're a really good manager, you're not simply ruling and writing the schedule or whatever that looks like. You're actually engaging constantly to make sure that your team is able to show up at their best, that you're helping them meet their challenges head on, that you're helping them with any of their interpersonal issues between each other in a really meaningful way, that you're making hard and fast decisions around this isn't just going to work and hope things work out. Like, those things are really important. And in enforcing them, I can say from personal experience, you have to be prepared to really wear the brunt of somebody's disappointment in themselves. So if you dismiss somebody, and having had thousands literally of employees and people who also face mental health issues and cross those lines and get fired or let go or dismissed, why people don't like to have those confrontations is they're worried about their own personal mental health and reputation. You have to understand that there's something above all of that, and that is the safety and sanctity of your workplaces, your staff. And you have to hold those lines true, even when it hurts you the most, even when you want to give somebody another chance, even when you want to get to that place, there's boundaries that need to be held and enforced. Otherwise, people will not feel safe. And you guys can speak to this directly as being employees in places where you did not feel safe.
Yeah.
You don't feel protected. You feel like somebody could go into a rage. They could physically hurt you. They could mentally hurt you. Like, that can't exist. So I hope, Amy, that's helpful. Let me know.
I think that boundaries is a tough one, especially when we look at the context of the history of our industry. For so long, we've lived and worked in an industry where there has been a huge lack of boundaries. I can say that as a woman, I can say that as an employee, I can say that, as a service worker. It's just there's been, at least in my experience, such a disregard for boundaries. And when I started to get into building my own personal and professional boundaries in the last couple of years, I've realized it's a very weak muscle. I did not grow up in an industry or in a world where I felt like I was even entitled to my own boundaries. You know, I think it's a little bit different for women too sometimes, because we're so conditioned to be of service, you know, a maternal kind of people pleasing, give, left empty, depleted, all output, no input. So it's interesting, you know, coming in and now working in an industry where I'm glad it's resonating. Someone just said that they feel the same way too. Like, what are boundaries? Like, this is a very new conversation to me in the last, I'd say, 5 years. And in the last 3 years, I've been doing a really like conscious, mindful effort of enforcing my own boundaries and writing them down even for myself to determine what they are before I can action them. Because
Beautiful.
I think a lot of times we think about things and we hold them in our hearts. But I heard someone say this the other day, that sometimes unless, you know, you write things down, it's like an architect. They imagine things and they have a vision, but in order to execute and build it, they have to make plans. You know, they have to write these things down. And when I kind of came to that, I realized, okay, I have to write these things down for myself so that I even understand what they are before I can come out into the world and say, you know what, these are my, you know, personal boundaries. And I sometimes use the word, I sometimes don't actually use the word. It's just a matter of just setting those kind of like limitations or fences almost of personal boundaries or space or whatever it is, rules for myself, whatever it is. It can show up in so many ways. But I love what you said, Mark. I think that is so powerful. One question around boundaries actually that came up for me was around, oh, sorry, Ariel, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I just want to add in that, you know, I think in our industry, we're conditioned to not ask for help, number one, and number two, always say yes, chef, yes, chef. And I think that if you actually consider the fact that we don't even know where that came from, you know, it's an archaic principle. You have to really start to readdress within your own self what your comfort level is to begin with. You know, there's so many of these archaic principles that were just, you know, our status quo for us because of the fact that they're there. So, you know, in reassessing them one by one, you know, I think considering what our self-worth is super important. Absolutely.
And you choose to participate. Like, you ultimately always have choice. So I wanted to reflect something to Hassel before I will also reflect something here, but I think what you said, Hassel, about language is really important. Because when you come at somebody and be like, I have a list of my boundaries, I don't care who, the Dalai Lama is triggered by that. People are gonna be triggered. They're like, well, okay, I feel like this is turning into a negotiation. Right? And you're like, actually, it's not negotiable. Like, oh, even worse, like, this is it. So how do you share with them? And so using your language, using your energy, using your tone, using all of those things that are really intrinsic to making people feel safe will allow them to show up for you. So if you say, like, never in a group setting, just pull somebody aside, I could pull Ariel aside and be like, hey man, when we were online at that last event, you kind of snapped at me without looking at me. And it's really important for me just as a person to be seen, because I have like a lot of trauma around not being looked at, you know what I mean? So if you could do me a solid, and when we're in conversation and we're in the battle, like, of the line, and we're trying to get 400 things out, if you could just look at me and be like, Mark, I will always respond well to that. But if you could just, for me, I promise to do my best work for you. If you could do that for me, it would mean the world. He's going to do that in real life now. That's going to happen. Like, we've just had this conversation. He's like, I will absolutely do that for you. Because I'm asking, because I'm telling why, right? So it's like, this is why this would help me. If my tone was like, do that shit again and see what happens, which is so intrinsic to our industry, right? Then what? Of course I'm going to test it again. First of all, is this a competition? Like, and then it escalates really quickly. And of course I'm using whole examples, but somewhere in the middle there is what we actually do, and it just continues to trigger, right? So if we're in conversation with people, it's really important to understand that interpersonal speeds exist. That same 0.6 to 3 seconds is very different to people's reflection time and their processing time. So I process really quickly, and I work really, really quickly. That doesn't mean I'm any smarter or any more in tune or any of that. That's just how my brain works. People I work with don't work that way. They're very thoughtful. They're very reflective. They write a lot of things down. They take time. Process matters. That's why we work together, because we bring different things. If I demand that somebody reflects to me instantly what I'm saying or doing, and that's not their skill set or their speed or the way that they work, of course it's going to create friction. And I'm crossing lines. So to get the best out of people, I did this really interesting discussion with a friend of mine, Alan Macy, last week, and he's a neuroscientist and just this really brilliant guy. And he's like, I always take 48 hours. He's like, if something is major and I'm really upset, I take 48 hours. And that's where the old story of sleep on it comes from, right? And if we look to ourselves and think, man, there's very few times in my life I'm upset that I slept on it. Like, there's none for me, to be honest. Like, every time I've slept on it, I'm like, oh, thank God I didn't send that text message at 2 a.m. Or thank God I didn't press send on that goddamn email. It's in my drafts. Like, thank God. First of all, hypertext is bullshit. Call people, video chat them, see them in real life. Hypertext is too easy to misinterpret. But then the other side of that, and I just want to be clear to close this conversation on that, is like, if you give the window of cooldown, if you go past that window, now the story starts to twist and turn like a gnarly old willow tree, right? You're like, why hasn't that person done this? Why haven't I done this? That shit starts to stack up. Then your relationship is in danger. It's in danger, or it no longer exists in the beautiful way that it could, because you've created these false stories about each other. This person didn't honor me in this way. This person didn't bring me along. This person didn't say this. Have you asked that person? Have you spoken to that person about it? And 9 times out of 10, it's a no. Our assumptions just rule that narrative. And it hurts. It hurts people because they also don't know what they've done a lot of the time, right? You're hostile with somebody and they're like, what's the matter? And you're like, you know what the matter is. Like, I wouldn't be asking you if I knew. Like, well, you should know.
I love what you're saying, because you're empowering people to use their voice. And I feel like that is so important. That's another, again, weak muscle. The last couple of years, I've definitely gotten much louder and prouder about everything. But I think that it's true. You can never assume that someone knows what you're feeling, thinking, experiencing, any of that. I'm curious, we all have talked about, we all have like heard about all the danger that exists in this crisis. I think in every crisis there's danger and opportunity, and we all know the like negative things that we're feeling, the depression, the anxiety, all that. I would love to hear, in your opinion, in this crisis, what opportunities have you seen show up or present themselves?
The list is so long. So I'm going to go, thank you for the question, first of all. Also, thank you for allowing me to get super fired up today. Like, I'm feeling really like impassioned, which is nice, because I haven't felt that gear in a little while. So I appreciate you guys for creating this space. Our global food system is killing the planet and us. It is. It is. We started in wartime growing crops that we thought were the cheapest, easiest way to keep people alive instead of starving. Nobody needs to starve anymore. We don't need to grow soy. We don't need to continue to hit things with modified cornstarch, saturated fats, salts. We don't need to do this shit anymore, but we're doing it, and we're killing ourselves. I work in Brownsville with Help USA, which is a neighborhood in New York City, and it is the highest rate of diabetes, the highest rate of heart disease, the highest rate of the list goes on ad infinitum. That is an act of violence. Poverty is an act of violence. All of those things intrinsically, like, existing together, is what we call systemic oppression or systemic injustice, which has all sorts of other shit woven in: racism, misogyny, patriarchy, name it. It's all in there. It's all woven into that next box of Kraft dinner. It's
capitalism. Yeah.
Right? It's all there. And it's how we approach it isn't in the way I'm approaching it now with a group of people that I know understand and would like to learn more. When we speak about it, we say, how good does it feel to know that you supported your farmer with direct delivery because you can't go out? and found out that what you bought was a quarter of the price at Whole Foods. And it came to your door. And the farmer got all the money. Man, that feels good, right? Feels good to me. I don't know. And being able to cook with their product and tell them about it and share with them directly how beautiful that chard was, or like how that worked and how you can't get your head wrapped around that these tomatoes were only 22 cents each and they're better than any that you ever had at the grocery store. You almost feel stupid for not having known, right? It's crazy. And so like learning these things and seeing behind the curtain won't hurt our industry. Doesn't mean that people are still going to want to take the 27 steps to make the tuna crudo. It just knows they know how, and maybe they appreciate you more because yours is just a little bit better. They know where it comes from. They understand who you're supporting. They know what Hannibrook Farms is. They know what Oceanwise is. They know what sustainable line caught means. They're learning all of these things that empower them and us. So when we're teaching these classes, we don't go in and talk to people like they don't know what they're talking about. Food Network's been around for a minute. It's pretty popular. People know, but they just don't know. They've seen it, but it's like, I've also watched somebody fix a car. It doesn't mean I know how to do an oil change, but I'm pretty sure if somebody showed me in an hour, I would know how to do it forever. So I think we have this moment of empowerment and understanding that creates not only financial justice and social justice, food justice, and all of these things, but it has to be approached with a co-creative mindset. How do we teach as many people as possible to do the work that will actually change the system? Because if we all stop buying Wheaties tomorrow, I promise you they stop making them. They just stop. That's the way the economy works, right? Instead of marching and burning flags, because apparently that shit still doesn't work. Like, what does it look like to approach with kindness, with love, with understanding? You can still have a hard edge. You can still be yourself. But like, how does it look to lead in that way? That opportunity is now. Because the stuff that is the glue that has held a lot of these false stories together is also that same martyrdom and brokenness that is led by the heads of our culinary community, which are the cooks. Ultimately, the chefs have created a lot of this toxicity because they themselves don't feel whole. They themselves are underpaid, overworked, mentally ill, addicted. They're fucked up. And so if they're guiding us, but they know that, or they have this assumption, they don't know anything. They have an assumption that other people don't understand, right? Which is very much a mindset too. Then how do we lead our way out of this? So I think that there's so much opportunity here and an awareness. I saw the stat yesterday that gave me great hope. That was like, it was just shy of 70%. I think it was around 65% of Americans surveyed realized the depth of the climate crisis because of this moment. And I saw another accompanying illustration that was really beautiful. And it was 3 waves. It was 3 tsunami waves. And COVID was this big, and then the recession was this big, and then climate change was this big. Like, if we think this is troublesome in this moment where we have to stay inside, we can be inside right now. And so there are all of these different things that I think work in a system, you guys, that are an opportunity for us to grow as society and as humans. And look, when we always trying to remember the 100-kilometer diet movement. Nobody knew what the fuck that meant. Like, they got it, but they didn't get it. It was like, yeah, that's fine, but I can't grow green peppers, right? Like, you totally can. Like, what? What do you mean? How? So we didn't do the whole story. We only were like, this is a concept. We adhere to the concept, but you don't get to participate. Well, you do by eating our food. That's not interesting to people. How many people know how to make sourdough? They're having my pizza experience right now. All over the world. Like, damn, I pay $9 for this. I can make these every day, and they get better. And like, understanding why bread works also helps us understand why food works, why energy works, why our gut is connected to our brain, why when those 2 things are fed properly, we can consistently hold open, comfortable, less anxious space. Like, all of this is a moment. And the flip of that is I want to get the hell out of the house.
Yeah.
Can somebody let me know?
But you know what, like, I think just to add on to what you're saying as well, people understanding and actually realizing the value of that social connection. Like, you know, the meeting place that is the restaurant or the cocktail bar or whatever that means. And, you know, why that side of bread costs $4 because of the number of hours that, you know, whatever baker spent making it. So, I mean, I think you're right. There's such a learning opportunity and moment going on right now. One of the things that we keep on seeing, and Hassel kind of mentioned that in every crisis and every danger, there's opportunity, but I think there's also hope in it as well. And that seems to be a reoccurring kind of message that we keep on getting. This is our 4th webinar, and every single one it comes up. What would you say would be your hope for the next generation of people coming into this industry?
Oh man. I mean, that when you say it to me, like it goes from the industry and it's visually doing this for me, it's moving outwards, right? So I work with a lot of different youth movements in general. We've put the majority of our firepower, being that mentorship, resource, connectivity, community behind youth movements, right? So we're really in that place of the one that everybody uses, and I'm sorry because I don't actually truly believe this, but it's like, we fucked it up, sorry, let's help you fix it. And by helping you, it's mainly get out of your way because you know best. And that's all true. I've got to see people who are 14 years old keynote in an eloquent and deep state that just would floor most people. Kids know. They've always known. So when we talk about homelessness, when people are like, we teach hate, we teach racism, we teach misogyny, we teach these things. Nobody's born that way. And people are like, oh, they were born. And then, no, that's just not, we teach it, right? We teach it by watching. We're habitual by the people that we love and that we care about watching. So we're watching right now heavily. We're watching how each other are reacting. We're watching who we're going to choose to work with, work next to. We're seeing people really grossly capitalize on this moment, and we're making decisions about them in more than 0.6 to 3 seconds. We're just making decisions. Like, okay, I don't do that. So when we talk about homelessness and we watch kids, youth, 12 and under, work with people who are marginalized or see people who are marginalized, what do? They run to them. They walk to them. They tug shoulders. I want to help. How do I help? And then we guide them by saying, that's dangerous, don't. We say it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until they believe it. So we do that. We say that there's not enough power, that the system is broken, that all of these things, the things that I believed as a youth didn't come from nowhere. They came from my experience and the words of the people that I loved and respected. So what we can best do as an industry right now is own our shit and model it. There's all these other mental health organizations springing up, and they've been springing up for years now. Unfortunately, the people who lead them won't own their own shit. How can you build trust if you don't share? Like, there's no way that somebody's going to come to your organization, open up about themselves, feel safe to be with you, if they know that you refuse to own your own shit. So you may think that you're healing and then you're doing the work, and by creating an organization or by creating a movement or creating an event, you're helping. But there's an unspoken understanding and trust that will not allow those movements to grow or support unless you're fucking real. And so there's the best thing we could do in this industry right now. We're seeing people have modicums of success with it in Montreal, some in Vancouver, or people are at least interested because they're leaders who've been known to be bullies. Now, they haven't taken the most important step, which is the next one, to say, I was a bully. I owe apologies. The second they do that, then the power is released. Like, it opens, right? And there's an opportunity for our industry to go, oh, thank God. Just saying that you had mental health or addiction issues is not enough. No shit. You work in the restaurant industry, right? We get it. Why? Why now? Why you? Right? So I think understanding, can you imagine like working in a brigade in the early 2000s and your chef walked in and went, you know what? I am really sorry. I feel like I've been abusive to you guys, and I feel like I've broken your trust, and I feel like I want to work really hard to earn it back. Would that be okay? And meant it. Like, that feels so foreign to us while you and I are both grinning right now. Is like, can you imagine?
No, I can't. And I honestly, we're at 3 o'clock, so I do want to unfortunately wrap up this conversation just to honor people's times. But I think you've left us with the most important exit, which is I would like to encourage anyone listening to really, really, really let that sink in. You know, I think all of us need to hold ourselves accountable. I think all of us need to examine, you know, Ryan, I love it. He says, I could listen to another few hours. I love it. I could also listen to another few hours, but, you know, we did promise an hour. So, Mark, we might have to have you back at some point.
Well, until you let me outside, I am available.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if the world's ready for you to get out.
I got some things to work out before I go out there.
Yeah.
Guys, what an
thank
honor.
you so much. Thank you so much for being so real. You know, we're trying to do these Real Talk webinars to keep it real, and you really did not disappoint, Mark. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Lots of love, everybody, and thank you to everybody who tuned in and came through.
Thank you so much to everybody. I hope everyone has an awesome day. And like we said, we will be creating a YouTube channel and hosting all of these webinars so that anyone that wasn't able to tune in will. Thank you, Mark. All the love. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Nice to see you.